in the night, and then they decide to go home because they decide and they figure the city gates are going to be locked for security. He's here within the city, and so we can go home and we can get some rest, come back at dawn, and he's going to be trapped. We can ambush him and we can kill him. So they all go home. And so I don't know if Samson knew this or he was done what he was doing and he decides, I'm going to now leave. And so he gets up at midnight, probably getting word that they were there because there's no reason that for him to do what he would do after this. And at midnight, he goes to the city gates, and the scripture tells us that he takes a hold of the city gates, which are massive, and he lifts them up, including the two gate posts. He pulls them out of the ground, support bar and all, and he carries them on his shoulder to the top of the mountain overlooking Hebron. Now, some Hebrew historians say that this was a significant act. First, because Samson is a brute warrior. That's what I was talking about last week when I said a lot of guys love Samson, especially growing up. And there were like two characters I remember in my children's kind of Bible illustrated book. They're much different than today. Today they're pastel colors and they're all cute. And there's little bunnies, maybe Samson running around. Mine had, David cutting off the head of Goliath with Goliath's head holding it out. It was gave you a good picture. And so the two, the stories that just really drew guys into this Bible story book were David and Goliath and then Samson. Because with Samson, there were all these feats. There were all these manly things. And so this was one of those feats where he takes the gates. He's this brute warrior. He kills 1,000 soldiers with the jawbone of a donkey. He takes 300 foxes and ties their tails together and sets the fields on fire. He does all of this stuff, and now he goes with this superhuman strength, and he lifts these gates up, and he carries them off. He is a brute warrior, and yet he's a bit of a prankster. He's playing games and he's doing riddles with the Philistines. And I think there's a little bit of humor in taking the foxes and tying their tails together and lighting them on fire and sending them out. He's a prankster, but also he is a brute warrior. And so some Hebrews are saying that this is significant for that reason. First of all, if you look at where he's at, he's in Gaza. And Gaza is a major trade route between Syria and Egypt. And so seeing the city gates removed by a single man would serve as a testimony of God's power, because the Israelites, whom Samson belonged to God, the true and living God, who the Israelites worshiped, was his God. And so for these nations who would go from Syria to Egypt to pass by and see all of these gates and the post and everything moved by one man would be a testimony of God's power to these other nations, especially the other nations who had been oppressed by the Philistines. Because the Philistines were this ruling people who oppressed other people and kind of had their own way when it came to trade and demanded what people would pay and all of these different things. And so imagine these nations coming by, seeing these gates taken by one man and kind of mocking the Philistines and kind of saying, serves them right. You got what you deserve, because they had been oppressed. And so this is a major trade route. This is a major scene. And yet it's almost a humiliating act on behalf of Samson to do this. Then Hebron, where he takes the gates, not to Hebron, he could have done that. But as some theologians and historians say, the Hebron people would have seen that, and it would have been a great testimony. But only they would have really witnessed that and not others. But what he does is he takes them to the top of a mountain that overlooks Hebron so more people can see it. But Hebron was considered a holy city. It was an important city. We see it all through Scripture. It's the burial place of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the place where David was anointed. It's the first capital of David's kingdom. King David broke the Philistines' power once and for all in Hebron. And so Samson started the fight. This is the end of his life. You'll see in just a moment that this is one of his final feats before his death. And so he has started this fight with the Philistines. He has started something with them, and he's taken these city gates to look over the very place where David would come in and finally break their power. He starts a fight. David would then finish the fight. And so by placing the gates on a mountain, a large number of people would witness the feat, and it would embarrass the Philistines. So he's used his brute power. He's shown his strength, but there's also that prankster side. There's also that side of sticking it to them, sticking it to the man, making them be embarrassed and ashamed of what he was able to do to them. This only further angers them, wants him dead, wants him captured. So in Judges chapter 16, verse 4, it says, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah, once again, another Philistine woman. And she lived in the Sorek Valley. So Samson falls for this other Philistine woman, and the Philistines once again see an opportunity to kill him. That they kind of know what his weakness is. And so they offer Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver each. Now, it doesn't tell us how many Philistines there were, but a group of Philistines come to her, and they each offer her 1,100 pieces of silver if she will find out the secret to his strength. And we talked about this last week. Samson attaches his wagon. He is attaching his life to a woman who does not share his values, doesn't share his beliefs, has no loyalty to him. And as if he did not learn that the first time, he's once again blinded by the lust of the flesh, which serves as a great example for all of us. That when we follow, the Bible tells us to avoid the lust of the eyes, to avoid the lust of the flesh, to avoid the lust of the world, to avoid these things. And Samson shows us multiple times how it only leads us to trouble, how it only leads us to despair. And not only has he not learned his lesson, but we are the same. How many times have we gone down the same path over and over and over again because we don't learn our lesson, because we're foolish, because we don't see the error of our way? Maybe we blame other people. Maybe we blame other things rather than looking at ourselves and our sinful flesh and understanding that instead of yielding to God, we're yielding to ourselves. We're yielding to our flesh. We're yielding to that which we think will give us pleasure. And so she has now been set up, and I'm not going to read all of the scripture for each of the scenarios, but I'll summarize. You can go and read chapter 16 yourself, but between 16:5 and 16:15, those verses, you will see how she is manipulating him, how she is toying with him. She's once again using the emotional approach that his first wife took with him when she was trying to find out the secret to his power. And so the first night, as they are together, she is asking him, and she is telling him, if you love me. Anybody ever had that game played? If you love me, you won't do this. If you love me, you would do this. Doesn't matter. It could be a woman. It could be a man. All manipulators, whether in fun or for serious, which is more detrimental, but maybe you've heard that. Maybe you've had that said, and that's what she's saying to Samson. If you loved me, you would tell me the secret. I mean, after all, if we are to be married, and after all, if we're going to be together, after all, if we're going to be intimate with one another, I mean, why would you withhold this from me? You're not withholding anything else from me. And so the first night he told her, if they tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will become weak and be like any other man. And so what does she do? She goes and she ties him up. She then asks again, and she plays the same game again. If you love decision, because we desire something, because we want something, because we think it's going to give us something, ignoring the sheer danger, ignoring the consequences that are ahead of us. It's the tactic of our sinful flesh, and it's the tactic of the tactic of the sinful flesh of other people who are also maybe seeking something from us for their own pleasure and for their own purposes. Because I heard laughter, and it's probably further back. I heard laughter, and it's probably further back. So I'm not saying they need this sermon. So that's why they sat on the front row. 1,100 pieces of silver from each. No, here's my beliefs, and no, here is what I have committed to. That it almost brings joy to people and a glee to people to try to get you to abandon that. People to try to get you to abandon that. Nikki and I were listening to could be